We are discussing the general principles of what creates speed, and we're learning how to see these principles in action. We've discussed various aspects of how to create propulsion. We've discussed various aspects of how to reduce drag. And now we're going to talk about how to time everything to make things as effective and efficient as possible. So one, we want to use the best actions to get to the goals that we want. And we want to be able to see how swimmers time things so that they can use as little energy as possible. So there's 6 different types of timing that we're going to discuss. In this video, we're just going to discuss arm-to-arm timing, and that's freestyle and backstroke. How do the arms relate to each other? As you can see, then we'll talk about arm-to-leg timing, which happens in all the strokes, arm-to-rotation timing, which also happens in free and back, arm-to-undulation timing, which happens in butterfly and breaststroke, breath timing, and then smooth transitions between the different aspects of the stroke. So let's get into arm-to-arm timing. Okay, we are going to start with backstroke timing because it is the simplest. As compared to the other strokes, the timing in backstroke changes very little. Regardless of how fast swimmers are swimming, the timing tends to be very similar. A lot of this has to do with the structure of the shoulder, and there's only certain ways backstroke can be swum effectively, and that has to do with the rotation. We'll talk about that when we talk arm to rotation timing. But what we're just going to focus on now is the relative timing of the arms to each other, and we'll see that it doesn't necessarily change. So what happens here is as one arm enters, the other arm finishes the pull. And so they tend to move in relative opposition. The entering arm is a little bit ahead of the pulling arm. So you can see the arm is entered here, and then the stroke finishes right there. And so this is the basic timing that you see no matter what. If swimmers are swimming at 200, if they're swimming at 50, if they're just swimming aerobically, it tends to be pretty similar. The stroke rate does change dramatically, but the timing doesn't change very much. And so what's important is that the arms are moving more or less in opposition. You can see it right here on the left. As one's going up, one's going down. And then as one's going up, one's going down. And as the one arm is finishing, the other arm is in the process of setting up the pull. So as soon as that pulling arm lets go of the water, the other arm is able to engage on the water and keep propulsion pretty steady. And so that's what's happening in backstroke. There's not a whole lot going on. It stays pretty similar, and mostly swimmers just have to be aware that when one arm is pulling, the other arm is recovering, and they're kind of moving in opposition. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. We'll take a look at it here underwater, and as the hand enters, and as it's setting up the catch, the other arm finishes the stroke. As the other arm is getting ready to catch, and it does catch, and then entry, and then that arm finishes, and by the time the catch is set up, that other arm has exited. So the arms are moving in more or less opposition so that propulsion can be maintained for as long as possible and as continuously as possible. And so as the one arm is finishing, the other arm is setting up the stroke, and once that other arm finishes, you've got this pull starting to act here and get on the water. So that last video was from a 50 backstroke, and we'll take a look at this as a 200 backstroke. So as we see here, the hand is just finishing here, and the catch is just getting set up, and then hand finishes there, and then it's finishing the stroke right as the catch gets set up. And so there's a pretty much continuous application of force here, and it's the same thing in a 50 and a 200. The timing is very similar. So as the catch gets set up, right as the hand exits, and so that right when that hand comes out, applying a force backwards on the water, getting ready to go. And so even in a 200 and even in a 50, the arm-to-arm timing stays pretty similar because that's the most effective way to swim backstroke. On the other hand, when it's time to talk freestyle, things get a little bit more interesting. There tends to be a very dramatic change in the arm-to-arm timing as we move from slow speeds to really fast speeds. And so what tends to happen is there tends to be more of an overlap timing. And as you get faster and faster, the arms actually start to move in opposition more, whereas when you're swimming slow, it tends to be an overlap. So watch this athlete here. This is a 1,500 meter race. You can see the hand enters right as he begins to start the pull. And so then the arm pulls, and then the other arm enters as he starts to initiate the pull. And so there's an overlap. Both hands are in the same area. They're both in front of the body at the same time. And there's an overlap between the timing. The arms are not moving in opposition. And so what happens here is from this point, he's let go of the water until probably about right there, there's no application of force. And so there's a gap between the propulsive forces with the arms. And we'll watch again here. He finishes the pull here, and now he's just finished it there. He's yet to do anything with the arms, and right there, now he's starting to apply force back onto the water. So there's a gap between the strokes. And so what happens as swimmers start to swim faster and faster, they start to reduce those gaps. And that's what allows them to swim faster. They do produce more force within each stroke, but in reality, they produce more force per stroke cycle because they simply remove the non-propulsive phases. There's no gaps, and that allows them to swim faster. So while they do apply a little bit more force with each arm stroke, the biggest difference is the change in timing that reduces those gaps. So we can see here, right here, there's a big gap, big gap, big gap, big gap. Now applying force, big gap, big gap, big gap, now applying force. So that's really efficient in terms of swimming a 1,500 meters or a longer race, but it's not going to be efficient when you're trying to swim really, really fast. Now, from a sprint perspective, if we watch that right arm of the swimmer in front of us, still applying force, you can still see he's still applying force, and he's starting to engage with that left arm. And so there's not really any gap anymore. There's no gap between the propulsive strokes. And so here, he's still applying force, Now he started to apply force with the right arm. And so there's much more continuity in terms of the propulsion with the arms. And now the arms are moving much more in opposition. So when one arm's in the front of the body, the other arm is in the back of the body. And that position switches. So arm in front, arm in back, and then arm in front, and then arm in back. So very, very elite swimmers are actually able to create propulsion with both arms at the same time. So you can see here, he's still creating propulsion with that left arm, and he's already started to do so with his right arm as well. And so that tends to be pretty rare. Less rare, of course, at elite levels, but you have to be swimming pretty fast to be able to do this. And so still propulsion, you can see that backhand there, and he's already doing it on the left side. And so those are the primary changes in timing from an arm-to-arm perspective. With freestyle is that you have gaps where there's no propulsion, and as swimmers start to swim faster and faster, those gaps tend to shrink more and more and more and more. And so you go from a catch-up stroke or a hip-driven stroke or whatever else you want to call it, and then you move to an oppositional stroke where the arms are moving opposite, or some people call it a shoulder-driven stroke. It's the same basic idea, is that the timing of the arms change. And if we go back to the freestyle here, that timing happens because there's a pause in the front of the stroke. Right there, instead of applying force right away, there's a pause. And so the stroke itself is pretty similar, but it's that pause that allows for that gap in propulsion. And as swimmers start to swim faster and faster, you can see there's almost an immediate engagement in the water, and that's what allows for the different timing. And so the key concept here is that while swimmers do apply more force with each stroke when they try to go faster, the other, and probably the primary way that they increase their speed, is they reduce those propulsive gaps. And whenever they reduce those propulsive gaps, the average force per cycle starts to go up because you get rid of the dead spots. And even if you're applying the same forces, you're going to go faster. And so especially in freestyle, that's how speed is created, through timing. And so it's not always just more effort, it's better timing and a change in timing that creates speed. And they can do that, and swimmers can do that just by shifting the arm-to-arm timing. And that's why it's so important to learn how to do that effectively, especially in freestyle. Backstroke, it's not quite as much as a problem. There are other timing issues that we'll talk about later when people try to go really fast, but the arm-to-arm timing tends to stay pretty consistent in backstroke. In freestyle, when swimmers aren't able to manage this effectively, that's when they really struggle to create speed. So understanding how the arms relate to each other and how that changes as swimmers try to go fast is really important aspect of timing. And when you can see that, and you can start to understand it happening in your athletes, and you can see where some athletes are struggling to make it happen, now you can start to create interventions to address that. Hopefully you can see that. It's not super complicated. It's pretty simple. It's just a matter of changing the timing to the arms in order to create speed. And when swimmers can do that effectively, they're more likely to swim fast when they want to.